great paradox. And this paradox matters because there is an invisibility in the imagination and agency that surrounds the digital city that hides and disguises how power is constituted and unequally distributed, not only infrastructurally, but also culturally. With this in mind, I hope to offer a meaningful cultural reading of the city and of the digital city in particular. So in the next few minutes, I will first discuss with the narratives that define, constitute, and diffuse the meanings of the digital city, narratives developed by policymakers, corporations, but also by urban humans. With this discussion, all narratives I hope to show that these different narratives converge, and how together they shape a socio-technical imaginary of progress, seduction, and technological inevitability. I will then move to discuss the practices of the digital city as these are shaped in urban humans' everyday life. In the second part of the discussion, I want to show how, unlike the converged socio-technical imaginaries of the digital city, practices make digital cities actually diverge and become diverse, incorporating a range of needs and desires as much as materializing inequalities and divisions. Then I will reflect on the contradictory relationship between the singularity of the socio-technical imaginary of the digital city and the unequal plurality of practices that shape everyday life. And I go on to ask the question, how much does the promise of a progressive and human-centric digital city recognize urban humans as legitimate owners of the city, its culture and infrastructures? And in answering this question, I identify how a new urban order is set in place, what I will refer to as the digital order of the city. Concluding by identifying the project of the digital city as incomplete, reflecting on how it can become a reality of unfreedom as well, or a vision of actually progressive in democratic cities. But let me start from the beginning. And to start by defining what I refer to as digital city and briefly discuss what we know and what we don't know through academic literature about this area of study. So I use the concept of the digital city to refer to cities that are increasingly organized, lived and imagined as socio-cultural and economic spaces through digital connectivity. So the digital city, as I understand it, has at least three dimensions. The first one relates to policy and corporate initiatives to effectively connect services and market exchanges within the city and between the city and the rest of the world, using primarily software-enabled technologies. The second dimension of the digital city relates to planning and enforcement of digital systems for maximization of security and risk control in the city, what we often refer to as surveillance technologies. And thirdly, and very importantly, it also refers to the wide and growing access to digital connectivity that enhances social connection and consumption practices among urban humans. I choose the concept of the digital city over the concept of the smart city, which is a concept that perhaps some of you are more familiar with in the literature, for two reasons. First, because the smart city has been associated primarily with branding certain kinds of cities used by corporations and policymakers in a very specific way and rather utopian way about technologies, but also because a lot of literature, including the critical literature that I'm engaging with here, has looked at smart cities primarily as networked cities of exception, by focusing on specific examples in specific places, places like Sondo or Dubai, or more recently Toronto, which is a city I will briefly refer to here as well. So in referring to digital cities instead of smart cities, I want to look at the different experiences and visions of network cities, some of which has been already deeply networked, and others as well that are being on their way to being deeply connected, or even those who are not deeply connected, but imagine as becoming connected in the future. And I will refer here to Havana, the capital of Cuba, to show what that means. So this allows me to reflect, or I hope it allows me to reflect on the plurality of the digital city as a vision and as an experience of digital relevance. And in developing this approach, and while I have already hinted to some of the limitations of existing literature, I identified two dimensions in the literature that inspire my approach, and I think it's very important to share some of the key parameters of what we know from the literature already on digital and smart cities. So first, I have been able to map out the advances of digital cities while learning from digital policy and urban governance literature. This literature identifies the advances of digital connectivity and relevant investment on the basis of demand by business and consumers. And according to this literature, consumers demand fast, constant, and reliable connectivity, especially for accessing services, and businesses demand reliable and fast connectivity to organize existing markets and to relate to new ones. And while this literature is important because it explains investment in and promotion of digital cities, it assumes certain positive neutrality in technological progress. So this is a good thing. This is what cities need, we are told, in relation to digital advances. So against this literature, critical scholarship in urban studies and media and communications has identified the complex ideological and technological basis of digital cities. It has thus challenged this technocentric vision of neutrality that governs cities through digital technologies. So scholars that you might have come across in this kind of literature might be Rob Kitchin, Adam Greenfield, or my colleague Alison Powell, who have identified that the investment in promotion of network cities has been driven by three main priorities, all of which relate to the neoliberalization of cities. So these critics have spoken a lot, for example, about the enhanced surveillance that keeps cities safer and thus less risky for the conduct of corporations and government. And you can see my fresh off-the-field picture there with the cameras from Songdo. It identifies the problems with the diminished, in the promotion of digital infrastructures and services as a way to diminish investment in public services and welfare provision for the people of the city, and then these diminished services and provisions, public provisions, becoming replaced by automated information and services that cost less and outsource responsibility. And the third dimension of that kind of important critique is the focus on the personalized engagement of individuals with the city. So instead of individuals connecting to cities through communities, through collectivities, more and more we all connect to the city as individuals through social media and apps that promote a relationship between the city and individual, perhaps rather than the city and its citizens, through practices of consumerism and individual entrepreneurship. So we're all supposed to be entrepreneurials of ourselves, that we competently use apps, find our way, find services, be self-sufficient in the city. So this critical scholarship is very important for me in this analysis I share with you now, as it shows how corporations and urban government often privilege neoliberalism, that ethos of ordinary and permanent surveillance of urban life, and also a technological determinism that promotes platforms and corporations as the key actors to manage the city. For example, when citizens are assumed to navigate the city through Google Maps or different apps that I know that you're using here, Kakao, I guess is the big player here, instead of the state having that responsibility of providing reliable public infrastructures. Or when urban dwellers' health needs are outsourced to AI-generated health advice apps, instead of the state following its responsibility of providing reliable health services to citizens. Yet this kind of literature that again is important, and I speak to it here, falls short of identifying the cultural complexities of the digital city as a vision, but also as an experience. This happens because the critique of the ideological orientation of the digital city has been driven by political economic concerns, that it has privileged a top-down perspective, focusing primarily on corporations and government, and their interest, and less so on looking at the digital city as a normative project that is becoming ordinary, part of how we live cities through narration and practice. Secondly, as Keating himself identifies in relation to this literature, it has failed to develop comparative and global perspectives and insights into different digital cities, focusing primarily on exceptional cases and using those exceptional cases for generalization. So SOMTO has been discussed a lot in relation to what cities should be like or what they shouldn't be like. But of course, this is one very specific case. And thirdly, while being driven by an interest on urban and digital inequalities, this literature largely, as I briefly mentioned already, largely ignores the urban humans. And when it does engage with the people of the city, it focuses primarily either on the designers of technology or on digital activists. So hardly engaging with the ordinary people, the users, and the inhabitants of cities themselves. So I developed my cultural approach while engaging with what we learn and what we won't learn, and what we don't know from this kind of literature. If, and as argued in this literature, the project of the digital city is used to govern, but also to control and commodify cities and urban life, how are urban humans constructed in this vision? And how do they experience this envisioned digital city? I want to turn very soon to some empirical snapshots from my fieldwork over the last 3-4 years, which has taken place in different cities across the world, to discuss how the digital city and its humans are constructed in corporate, governmental, and citizens' narratives, but also in citizens' practices. And these snapshots, of course, cannot be all encompassing and fully fleshed out, but with reference to narratives and practices from different actors and locations, I hope that I can highlight how the imaginary of the digital city converges globally and how, of course, it diverges locally and globally as well. So I want to start by talking a bit about the narratives of the digital city. How is digital city spoken for and imagined by corporations, by policymakers, and also citizens? So an inventory of policy and corporate narratives of the digital city in different parts of the world, which I started since the beginning of the project, actually caught me by surprise. And perhaps it also, that surprise reflects a shift in the narratives, I think, of how digital cities are constructed in that top-down way by corporations and by policymakers. So while I expected those narratives, the way corporations and policymakers selling the digital city being driven by narratives of profit and narratives of managerialism, instead, what I found more and more is that they're driven by what I call a progressive human centrism. That is, narratives that speak less about profit, speak less about organization, and more, they emphasize progress and freedom through technology and through and for the humans of the city. And let me explain what I mean through some empirical examples. So let me start with an example from New York City. Has any of you heard the Human Project? Have you come across the Human Project? So the Human Project is a project where 10,000 New Yorkers are expected to participate in changing history, as we're told. So this is a project which invites New Yorkers to volunteer and to share a range of personal information from health to entertainment choices to family histories to what they do in their everyday life. Pretty much everything they are and everything they do. For 20 years. And what is the aim? The aim is the Human Project. So this project is initiated in some of the labs of NYU, New York University, and includes academic and corporate partnership, and it will collect information about urban dwellers and their lives like never before. Everything for 20 years. This is a fascinating and scary, perhaps to some of us, project. So as noted in the project website, the Human Project aims to solve our community's biggest challenges from preventing diabetes and asthma to improving schools and relieving financial stress. So data comes with this huge promise, data collection. So the Human Project invites New Yorkers to share the tiny bits of information they create from moment to moment every day. This simple act will help scientists reveal how all the millions of tiny puzzle pieces in our lives connect together, making New York and our wider world a cleaner, safer, and happier place to live. There is a concept of happy, which also I have seen again and again and heard about in these narratives of the human digital city. So key players or makers of the project are not the scientists, the designers, but actually the humans themselves, the New Yorkers themselves. The narrative of the Human Project is very clear. The city's humans and their data hold the key to a better future, and it is up to New Yorkers themselves to take control of a better future for themselves, but also to have that responsibility and joy of changing the story of the humankind. And just to move on and thinking about how the digital cities run and narrated, I think we cannot discuss that without including Google. Google that has become and is growing as one of the biggest players in how we think, narrate, imagine, and construct digital cities. So let me move to Canada and Google's new major project at Waterfront Toronto. Any of you have heard of this project? Some of you? So this is a project that is going to transform a derelict waterfront area of Toronto into a livable, smart, and digitally connected city. Sidewalk Labs, which is a branch of Alphabet, and Alphabet is the company behind what we know as Google, has taken over this major project of regeneration in Toronto, which is more than infrastructural, but in fact it claims, but it has also been widely contested and attacked for that. It claims to be more or less a project of digital democratization of the city. So in the first urban project that we see that fully and digitally transforms the city's neighborhood, from self-driving cars to climate controlling technologies, fully coordinated smart homes and sensors across the neighborhood and its streets, the project promises to bring to life an ordered, livable, exciting and sustainable neighborhood. This is a vision and a major experiment, of course, because Google is using this project as a testbed for its latest technologies. But as the company makes sure, it emphasizes this is a project for the humans of the city. And here is how they talk about it. Sidewalk's vision puts people at the heart of its objectives. Technology is never the end goal, but rather a tool that empowers people to improve quality of life. The world does not need another plan that falls into the trap of treating the city as a high-tech island. A new neighborhood district must be cheaper to live in, cleaner to breathe in, safer to travel in, easier to find work. Otherwise, why build it? So in many ways, Google here preempts all our critique about what is wrong with this kind of project, because it says that before you guys, before the citizens or the academics thought about the humans, we have thought about the humans ourselves. Google's promotion of a human-centric digital city expands across the world. For example, a white paper for Hong Kong's digital present and future, which is titled Think 2020, Smarter Digital City, reminds citizens, governments, and the interested corporate parties of an inevitable human-centric digital future. As they say in this white paper, the next few years will usher in even higher levels of engagement for the average Hong Kong citizen with digital healthcare, service sharing, and auto-centric voice command. The day has arrived, and digital convenience is a necessity. This almost religious tone, the day has arrived, that we see in these claims, outlines a digital future as an inevitable and seductive destination for the city and its people. And it is also a narrative that is echoed in policymakers' plans for urban transformation in many different parts of the world. So recently, the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, jumped on the wagon of the digital city in his own plan, which is titled Smarter London Together, the roadmap to transform London into the smartest city in the world. It's interesting that all these plans is about the ex-city will always be the smartest. Songdo will be the smartest, Toronto will be the smartest, London will be the smartest. So we have so many of those, the best of the best. But that vision again emphasizes, the smartest cities in the world, but which also, according to Sadiq Khan, meets the needs of our citizens to make London a fairer, more prosperous, and more equal place for all Londoners. It's slightly different tone because of his different politics, but equally promising, India's Prime Minister Modi announced 100 smart cities in the country as constituting the next stage of modernization. As he put it, cities in the past were built on riverbanks. They are now built along highways, but in the future they will be built based on availability of optical fiber networks and next generation infrastructure. And similar claims, I can go on and on and on and share with you how digital corporations, platforms, but also policy makers in cities across the world reproduce these projects, from South Africa to the European Union, from Sao Paulo to Konza Techno City in Kenya. The promise of better lives and the fulfillment of modernity's ideals of progress and freedom runs deep and across the vision of the digital city. And what is imagined and what is promised to be delivered in the corporate and governmental plans is a human-centric city. I hope this becomes visible in the examples I shared with you. The city for humans who enjoy the best qualities of the city: diversity, excitement, quality of life, doing everything when you want, in the way you want to, because of the availability of information and technologies, but cities without the evils of the city, without crime, without pollution, without poverty. The discursive clarity in the articulation of the digital city sets seductive goals for a defined, planned, and demarcated digital future. Importantly, the city that these powerful narrations propose is an ordered city that promises freedom, and there is a paradox here. The humans that digital strategies invite on board are both the makers and the recipients of the digital city promised success. And is this indeed the case? And do the humans of the digital city imagine their urban present and future like corporations and policymakers do? Is this the case when we think about the narratives of the humans of the digital city? So let me start answering this question by first zooming into London and a focus group of 18-year-old middle-class Londoners I spoke to in relation to this question. So in this focus group, a group of enthusiastic 18-year-olds, not unlike many of you in this room, very different to me and my age. So they have talked about how confidently they use digital technologies to navigate their city with their smartphones at hand, and how they get enormous pleasure when they discover via social media a new venue for experiencing London's underground hidden life. Digitally savvy and in control of the urban territory, these young people adopt familiar techno-utopian narratives of digital progress by describing how they conquer the city and its disorder, embedding their everyday life and consumption practices into its every secret corner as they see it, to enjoy places and cultures which would be out of limits without their certain apps, certain social media at hand. When I naively asked them, how about events and happenings in secret London that happens in the city, but it is not, but the information about it is not on social media? How do you find out about this side of London? And how do you discover it if it's not on social media? And one of the people in the group immediately and very confidently responded, if it's not on Facebook, it's not worth checking out. Jumping into a completely different context, that of Havana in Cuba, thousands of miles away, of course, from London, I observed how the city there, a city that is at the very beginning or at the very early stages of making any claims as a digital city because of its primitive infrastructures, I have seen how the city actually prioritizes the development of digital infrastructures against any other kind of investment on the many failing infrastructures of the city. Anything, from electricity to sewage, roads, health institutions, and so on. So for now, what that investment on the digital city vision in Havana means is that there are Wi-Fi networks that are installed in some public squares where the locals congregate to get online. When I asked one of the city's members of the creative class, the creative elite, what does the arrival of internet mean for the city, without hesitation, he said that this is the best and the necessary future for the city and its people, because, as he put it, there are two ways. Either you are on the internet or you're not. If you're not there, you do not exist. You do not exist in a world where most people live. Of course, and in fact, we know that the reality is that even though many people live on the internet, there are many more people who live in three-dimensional environments. So the convergence of corporate policy and citizen narratives here is impressive, even if not surprising. I'm sure many people in the room would agree with statements like that. After all, digital skills are indeed supporting better and safer access to the city's resources. We cannot deny that, no matter how critical we're going to be. Yet the converged trust and hope associated with the digital city cannot be fully explained on the basis of technological benefits. So there's something hopeful and important here, but it does not reflect the only truth. Again, people where everybody, most people live, is not the internet, it's cities, in fact, is physical spaces. So what is important in talking about these narratives here, what makes me think is like, why is the digital city privileged in narratives of better cities so much? And against, for example, investment in welfare, public services, free public spaces, better schools, or social policies that tackle inequalities. As we know, cities are some of the most unequal places in the world. In fact, it is the advance of a socio-technical imaginary, I argue, that brings together imagination, politics, and social norms, as Georgiou reminds us, in defining why the digital city is so important and why the digital future of cities is so important above and beyond any other kind of imagined future. These imaginaries, Georgiou continues, are collectively held, institutionally stabilized, and publicly performed visions of desirable futures animated by shared understandings of forms of social life and social order, attainable through and supportive of advances in sciences and technology. Narratives, as those that I shared with you in brief here, as research on social and socio-technical imaginaries has argued, act precisely as the glue that privileges certain relationships of symbolic and material relevance. In this case, promoting the relationship between cities and technologies as an unquestionable, just natural interdependence based on mere value, value and benefit, rather than in fact being identified as results of decision-makings, ideological choices, and priorities of city governments, corporations, but also certain people who occupy the city. In this way, the digital city is constituted as a normative project of progress, not a set of political and corporate priorities, not an issue associated with surveillance, social assorting, and commodification of everyday life. All the narratives that I shared with you here very much, I think, hide these dimensions that we might as well discuss in the digital cities, not only the benefit, the ease, the exploration, the excitement, but tip around the realities of the digital cities, and we could instead talk about surveillance, social assorting, commodification of everyday life. But we don't. And the reason we don't is that converged socio-technical imaginary. But what is the ontology of this imaginary? Let me move to the second part of this empirical discussion, which will be briefer, to assure you. So what is the ontology of this imaginary, and how much does it actually reflect the experience of urban humans in their diverse identities, locations, and engagement with the city and with digital technologies? I have offered you a snapshot of some urban human voices already from London and Havana. We saw how their imaginaries converge when they envision digital seduction, inevitability, and progress. And many of us in this room, including myself, can see how our own vision of the city converges with that singular imaginary, at least partly, and at least I would call only partly. But how much does practice of urban humans occupying different spatial and sociocultural positions reflect these converged imaginaries, where so many corporations, so many urban governments, and so many urban humans come together? What happens when we talk about practice? In bringing in snapshots from urban humans' own experiences of the digital city, I learned from practice theory. Practice theory that reminds us in different ways, and for example in the words of Cohen, that meanings are produced through the agency of social actors. So meanings are not produced when we say things, when we put them in brochures, but actually meanings are constructed when they relate to what we do through our practice. And of course, Lefebvre, more particularly, has noted that we cannot just study the conceived, so the narratives perhaps in order to impose it, but rather we need to take, in his words, take lived experience as the starting point and elucidate it in order to transform it. So what does lived experience reveal actually about the digital city? Let me return to my field work in Havana. So the new availability of Wi-Fi in some of the city squares has rapidly transformed public space. So these squares have become vivid spaces, actually, and vibrant hotspots of sociality and public connection in place and also through transnational connections. More particularly, most people go to these squares and go online to connect with their transnational families, families that are primarily living in the US, but who are separated, particularly because of politics, and now finally they can have those everyday encounters, as we all do, but other people in the world have not been enjoying for a long time, by connecting with them on social media. So this is an incredible form of transnational sociality here. And this is a new found communication freedom of public Wi-Fi in Havana offers vital support, of course, for familial and intimate connections across distance, especially with family in the US, but also at the same time, it fits back to global material and symbolic inequalities. And let me then talk about that mixed practice. One side of it is those vital transnational connections of intimacy. The other side of this practice is perhaps to make us think about those patterns of material and symbolic inequalities. So alongside the connected transnational families that I observed in the squares of Havana, very often I would observe many young people, especially young women, who were taking the very familiar selfies, pouting and staring at the screen in familiar ways. I don't have a picture, but I think we can only imagine how selfies are taken, reproducing in these ways patterns of digital femininity associated with a certain Western heteronormativity. Next to the reproduction of Western heteronormative order, another global dependency is reproduced. For some of the young women congregating in Havana squares, connecting to the US was not a family affair, but it was an economic affair, using the internet to offer sex video chats to affluent customers somewhere in that country. Free perhaps to control their own digital exchanges, and free to act beyond those global dependencies between global North and global South. So let me now also return to the young Londoners I have engaged with, and to give you also that another part of that story of how practices are more diverse than the ones celebrated among the affluent middle class young Londoners I referred to before. And to refer to a different group, a working class group of 18-year-olds. So these young people, unlike the middle class 18-year-olds, lacked that enthusiasm about the digital city, London. For the working class youth, the digital city reaffirms and expands growing inequalities in the city. Against that celebratory vision of a future of digital enjoyment that I mentioned earlier, working class young people refer instead to long working hours and to their inability to afford all the entertainment choices that the city offers, for which they know much more about now because there is more information available to them. But that information does not make them more able to enjoy the city, of course. They also talk about their concerns with gentrification, which I know that you were discussing earlier. Their concerns with gentrification as those digital tools that other people talked in a celebratory way, like Google Maps, might make their neighborhoods attractive and more safe for affluent urbanites to consume and to visit those neighborhoods that used to be out of bounds. But the cost of that freedom of the affluent urbanite is translated into excruciating rents and urban displacement for themselves, for the working class too. And finally, let me take you for a moment to Berlin, a city which is widely considered as the fastest growing startup economy in the world, and a city, as some of you might know, has taken hundreds of thousands of refugees in recent years. One of the most substantial recent corporate and public investments in support of refugees has been in the area of what is widely referred to now as digital integration. Digital integration refers to projects that use digital skills development to support newcomers and their entry into the city life and the city economy. Such initiatives have been embraced by a range of powerful actors, as you might understand, recognize some of them on the screen, and have supported a number of young refugees to indeed get new skills and to find a way in the city and eventually to employment. Again, this is the digital working, but working only for some. However, as a number of newcomers told me, digital opportunities have become almost singular opportunities for integration in the city, as there has been, along other cities, as there has been a disproportionate investment on digital integration compared to any other kind of services and opportunities. What it means, what this means, that disproportionate investment is that few benefit from support to their digital skills, finding their dream jobs perhaps in the startup economy, but for others it means that they end up doing digital work because they know that this is the only work that they can do. And more painfully, for many others, this is a way of becoming yet more excluded. Because in fact, most people are not the digital urbanites that digital integration implies and imagines. So many of the people that we met were very anxious because they realized that they cannot be part of that hype of the startup digital economy, either because of their age, because of their education, their language skill, their caring responsibilities, very often in the case of women. And they know that their inability to engage with the digital city might mean that they will be eventually expelled by the city and also from the country. So, what does the story of the digital cities converging imaginary and diverging practices show? As I promised at the beginning, and hopefully I delivered somehow, I wanted to offer a cultural take to the story of the digital city. Marcuse, who you might be reading in your classic readings, Marcuse pessimistically was writing in the first half of the 20th century that the uncomfortable, smooth, reasonable, democratic order of digital progress is actually a source of unfreedom. Put the promise of individuals who are free to enjoy, to share, and to withdraw from the city and its difference, depending on preferences or lifestyles, become a way to actually naturalize an unfree city, where individuals can enjoy, participate, and discover, as long as that means that they live certain kinds of lives, as long as they consent to do that digitally, and as long as they are happy to follow algorithmic guidance and containment. Setting these questions forward, as I come to the end of my talk, is not an attempt to criticize digital cities per se, and I know that some of you who are half my age in the room might think that this is a rant of an old person who doesn't get the digital, which might be true, but in fact, this is not a critique to digital cities per se. It's not a critique driven by a nostalgia of an old person for an actually never existing idealized vision of a city which was a community, which was real and convivial before digital technologies came in. This, in fact, never existed. So this is a critique which instead, and in fact, contests this precise vision of cities that are idealized, ordered, and consisting of convivial communities, as were promised by Google, governments, and often by ourselves to ourselves. Precisely if these are the cities we strive for, we might actually end up with more order but less freedom. What I want to argue is that we need to understand digital cities within the socio-technical and cultural order associated with capitalist modernity and the current moment. As a distinct and temporarily specific vision of capitalist modernity, the digital city brings together ideals of liberalism and of neoliberalism, and brings them together into a complex and precarious ethico-political arrangement with different implications for the future of cities and its humans, as I will try to show as I conclude. So I identified three fundamentals in the project of the digital city: the fundamentals of seduction, progress, and innovability, which I've been mentioning through my talk. So let me say just a bit more as I come close to an end about what this means and why I think the project of the digital city are in fact the convincing project of the digital city in fact reflect those ideal and ideological frameworks rather than the real or necessarily the real needs and achievements through digital technologies. So the first one is that of seduction, and I here draw from Byung-Chul Han. And I refer to seduction as the diffuse sense of fulfillment or the hope of fulfillment of desires through digital technologies integrations in everyday life. And we can remember those words of the first Londoner I mentioned about how seductive technologies are. The second dimension is that of progress, which I refer to as the promise of digital technologies for positive change. The promise of positive change taps into a progressive and very often into an anti-capitalist politics and also public sentiments in the post-2008 financial crisis city, where digital technologies have become hopeful vehicles for advancing democracy, urban sustainability in green cities, and also equitable cities. And we can see those progressive forces, for example, in the Human Project in New York. Inevitability is the third dimension that fixes the demotic policy power of the digital into an order that is best to embrace, accept, and benefit from, as it is as inevitable as capitalism itself. Yet it is different to capitalism. So this is not, the Digital City Project is not just another way to talk about capitalism. It's different to capitalism as the digital disguises coercive and unequal order of economic inequalities that reproduce, as we know, divided cities and divided global urban hierarchies. And you can see how this is played out, for example, in the case of Havana, where digital infrastructures become a priority for the city's modernization, more than failing transport and sanitary systems, for example. What is important here, though, about this project, unlike earlier phases in the planning and development of our modern city, is that these fundamentals represent more than top-down strategies imposed to the city and imposed to the city population by planners, corporations, and urban government. Importantly, and as hopefully those snapshots that I shared with you showed, these fundamentals now converge into a shared corporate, governmental, and citizen discourse, vision, but also practice, where different urban actors, beyond their position in urban hierarchies of power, have a role to play and to lead. As I repeatedly observed among many participants in my study, many urban humans embrace the socio-technical imaginary that assumes progress, inevitability, and individual control over the city. Digital technologies promise and partly deliver the conditions and the visions of cities that are limitless in their potential for work, enjoyment, love, but also sustainable and more equitable future cities. But as I also showed earlier, this converged imaginary is not reflected in the experiences of inequality in the digital city, and that creates a fundamental contradiction between those actors that desire, see and hear themselves in the digital city, and those who are silenced and dismissed when they do not fit in that narrowly defined socio-technical imaginary. Thus, the optimistic, but also in occasions aggressive celebration of progress and freedom driving the digital city imaginary, in many ways comes to address that incomplete project of the modern city, a city of humans for humans. At times of huge suspicion against capitalism, but little promise for an alternative, the digital promises the ideal human city. Yet, this ideal human city can only come to life through a precarious combination of endless promises of freedom and progress on the one hand, and a clear demarcation of the rules that will make this future possible, the rules of the digital order. And this is the scenario number one. An order that lacks coercion and violence, the digital order demarcates the rules and limits of freedom in an invisible way that transforms the city and urban life. It is an order that urban humans need, and they need to embrace and take forward, or to fail altogether, as the many people we saw in Berlin, that they can see failing. The seductive, inevitable, and progressive power of the digital are values to fully embrace and to fully commit to in this scenario. And the assumption is that those people and those cities who don't embrace the digital order will fall through its cracks, and there is a certain inevitability there as well. This order points to the unresolved struggle for the future of cities, which Richard Sennett identified in the uses of this order a few years ago. The city has always been a site of struggle between capitalist forces for ordered cities and the lived cities as disordered spaces of diversity and experimentation, the city that we all live in different ways and we experience in the streets. In fact, Sennett argues, not unlike Marcuse, who I mentioned earlier, who speaks about technological progress, he speaks of the ordered cities and ordered everyday life as providing comfort, but the comfort with which comes injustice and unfreedom. Yet, there's scenario number 2, and this is precisely the incorporation of progressive politics into the project of the digital city that shapes its appeal but also its ambivalence, where it can take us in the future. The digital city in many ways is the make or break of the neoliberal city at present. Through the advance of progressive narratives, as these emerge online and offline, we might see the rise of politics of resistance to what the digital order hides or perhaps disguises. So scenario 2 is still possible. This is not a scenario that opposes connectivity, anything but one that opposes digital cities for profit and control, and that as that singular promised project of a meaningful city. But this scenario to come to life needs its own conditions, and these conditions need more than reliable digital infrastructures, and can be realized through a number of urban strategies and tactics. And I want to conclude and to finish here by mentioning just some examples of how we can think of urban strategies and tactics where we don't idealize connectivity and we don't fall into the trouble of that singular, inevitable, and seductive future, but perhaps we think of connectivity within urban ecology for more democratic, inclusive, and connected cities. So some examples of those kind of conditions are those of urban hacktivism, the experimental and subversive uses of technologies that promote urban connections, beyond profit and against the surveillance society, the living urban life from without as well as within the network, imagining and practicing life beyond and outside the digital sometimes, and instead of being driven by technologies, to actually prioritize communities, local, national and transnational, and community and organization that includes more and excludes fewer. And of course, we have to think about the future of the city through that concept of active citizenship, a truly participatory city, not necessarily connected digitally and fully connected digitally, but connected in meaningful ways, which of course implies political and civic organization on and offline, for collectively setting forward fundamentals for democracy and sustainable cities, and of course being driven by what we would refer to still, I think, in a meaningful, visionary way as the right to the city for all. Thank you.
Okay, this is time for your questions or comments.
among some of the tactics that you mentioned to reclaim the city, that remind actually in today's class we also talked about Herbert Gans, urban villagers, and he talked about the urban villager, the West End, the residents selectively using mass media stories. So they are not fully influenced by mass media, but they still try to connect to other people in their own neighborhood. But that doesn't mean that they are not trying to exclude themselves from mass media, like TV or radio at the time. Actually, selectively use some of the messages, some of the programs for their own life in the neighborhood. But I think that's probably along the line with when you say without and within the network, so kind of selectively connection to the network. So I think there's kind of similarity, even though there's 50 years the gap between the mass media dominated the world and also the time when we talked about digital city or smart city. So that one of my observations here. But my question especially on the last slide. So you talked about scenario 1 and scenario 2. But I don't think that you really mean that we have to choose only one. But in reality, probably both scenarios will work together. But in every society, in every time, there are different layers of orders. So even though there's a really very strong order by very authoritarian regime, but still at the citizen level, at the resident level, they always very creative in making their own counter order, their own order. Maybe sometimes in everyday life they make the jokes about the formal order, but I think probably that's one of the ways to they kind of make their own counter narrative and also counter order. So can you talk a little bit about how those two scenarios work together or separately?
Thank you. Two very good and important points. I think the first point, I know it wasn't a question, but I want to emphasize the importance of that comment. That very often when we talk about the digital, we think that we're talking about really new, different conditions, right, in relation to technology, in relation to mediation, in relation to societal change. But I think you're very right to emphasize how much we can actually learn from looking back at history and the different uses of media and communications. And in fact, those questions about, how do we fully embrace, the digital media, or do we become more critical and reflexive in our uses? In many ways, these are questions we asked about mass media, right? Do we fully embrace television culture or what we're told in the press, or do we need to be critical citizens? And I think it's very important actually to contextualize many of these questions as being questions about citizenship and about mediation, rather than necessarily the specific technology. So technological change does not mean that the universe changes. And this perhaps is a helpful starting point to address your second question. Okay, so this is perhaps, it is a provocative way that I wanted to finish. It's that question that is provocatively saying, what kind of future, urban future do we want? Right? It's again, in many ways, returning to imagination, but a more kind of political, critical imagination. In fact, you're right. What we have in every society is like order and disorder, is consensus and dissensus, is like convergence and divergence of different forces. But I think what is important in putting them also in opposition, not only in continuity, is because I think that that first scenario, it's not that it will be replaced, because again, in an ideal city, we will all be equal, and inequalities would be would become redundant, and so on and so forth. But the reason I put them also in opposition is because I want us, I think, with this kind of approach, I want to alert us on thinking about the digital city project and our digital futures as that inevitable progressive future. So to keep thinking and contesting those forces of ordered cities. So it is about politics, it is about, you know, the political contestation of scenario one, rather than choosing about what kind of cities we want to have, if that makes sense. It's more of a political argument, political invite to think about, you know, the contradictions of the digital, rather than, you know, let's pick. I think we would all pick that if we had the choice. Right?
Thank you for the great lecture. I'm not from this class. I am just an outsider, but I really enjoyed your talk. And I guess given the fact that I'm not very much familiar with the urban communication or the things that you mentioned, or digital like a city, while I'm listening to your lecture, I can't help but thinking about the issue of digital divide, like especially, you know, we are all living in a society where the access to the internet is so crucial, and there are certain people who obviously enjoy this access, but there are other people who don't even have access to the internet, for instance. And I think that is one of the important issues that when we think about the digital like city, etc. And I'm wondering, when you actually meet with the people or interview your interviewees, these kind of narrative, like digital divide kind of issues emerged, and if that happens, and I guess you touched a little bit about when you say that the poor young urban youth in London, for instance, are less passionate about the digital city narrative, right? So likewise, I mean, I'm wondering, while you're actually doing a research fieldwork and then talking to the young people, how do they locate the issue of digital divide? I'm sure that there are some people who are really reject the idea about digital city or digital, digital city that you mentioned. I'm curious to know and hear more about these kind of chasms or this kind of conflict. Can you say more about that?
Yes, thank you very much. Again, a very important question. I want to go back to that question. I think this is a hugely important question, and again, if we think about cities, or if we think, about specific locations or specific demographics of people, we shouldn't forget some of the big fundamental questions. And again, I think some of the big fundamental questions that drive any discussion about, in many ways, at least to me, questions about communication have to do with inequalities, have to do with divisions. And many of the people who write about these things are driven by those questions. So the digital divide becomes important. One reason that I decided to go to Havana for this project, which is, again, it's anywhere but the conventional digital city, is precisely because I wanted to see how in locations that are very much outside the digital order, that are very much on the other side of the digital divide, how they experience, both digital transformation, but also digital opportunities. So I think it's very important to remember the digital divide, and I think divide challenges, and I think that's why, even though I'm a bit or a lot very critical of the digital city, I want to return back to the idea that there are great benefits from the digital opportunities. For refugees, digital training is important. For the people of Havana, being connected either to loved ones or a public, global public sphere, or other professionals around the world, is hugely important. So that bridging the digital divide in different ways is very important. So I want to use your question to re-emphasize that I don't undermine that. What I want, though, to problematize in relation to the discussions of digital divide is to go beyond that thing that if we are on the good side of the digital divide, we're okay. And the case of the working class Londoner youth is precisely that. These people are included digitally, but they're excluded in every other way from their city, right? They're excluded socially, they're excluded from the cultural and consumption opportunities of their city. So bridging the digital divide, cannot be the end of the conversation, but I think an important element of thinking about divides and inequalities in their totality within urban and global space. I hope that answers your question.
Most of your field work from the presentation is about cities that already exist, already have traditions and a long history, for example, Havana and Berlin and London, and how they are transforming into these so-called digital cities. And I would like to ask, how do you think the results differ from compared, for example, to Songdo, which is, it was literally artificially made from like wetlands from the ocean. There was no one there, so they can start from scratch and try to build this ideal digital city from trying to transform an existing city. How the process differs and how different or similar the results can be. And in terms, especially in terms of diversity and people from different sides of the divide living there or not.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, very important questions. So how do established cities vary from constructed cities around the digital tree or the digital order? I think they do vary. Taking by the way, we're just in Songdo yesterday. There's a lot of information to process here. I think the case of Waterfront Toronto is also another very interesting example, but we will see. We'll see how it evolves in a different geographical and cultural context to that of Songdo, but having that same principle, we build a city from scratch and we'll build it smart and happy. So I think those cities that are built from scratch have certain distinct characteristics that are very much primarily driven by a very top-down perception of what good cities are about. And in many ways, they expose us to this ideal of the digital utopia. That again, cities can be clean and working properly and being safe, and everybody then becomes happy. So this utopia that in practice, I think we can see also how it can turn into a dystopia. So for example, not real organic spaces of congregation in the city, no space of dissent, and so on and so forth. So there's something distinct, I think, in relation to these experiments that are worth looking more deeply, and in detail in their particularities. However, I think there is also a certain similarity that has to do with this converged socio-technical imaginary that I refer to, that either we're talking about London or the Indian smart cities or Songdo, that imagining of how our cities will be better and happier is the same. So we start from technologies and we think, it's like this is our, the magic one that makes us solve all urban problems. And this can be expressed in different ways, of course, in Songdo, and in different ways in London. So we have different empirical realities, I think, but we also have this ideological connection, convergence that runs across the world, more than ever before, perhaps, in relation to that convergence. How similar those narratives are.
I think one thing that we can think about, especially in the case of a city like Songdo, who's been built from scratch, because there's been no real memory or stories or any pre-existing narratives in that place. So probably I think one hypothesis that we can have is probably any kind of a counterforce or counter-narrative could be very weak, or even maybe non-existent. So, corporate or administrative narrative that you mentioned could have much more freedom to have their own version of the city without almost non-existent without any counter stories or counter narratives from the bottom. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's very important.
I think we have time for maybe one last question.
So like I found it very interesting that you have an interview with a man like 18 years old, and he says if it's not on Facebook, it's not worth it. Like it wasn't right. So like I was like wondering, like for young people especially, I think the separation between like the digital world, digital city, and the real world does not really make sense. For them, it's really just connected. It's just part of their life. I think for them, it's not really like separate world to think of, like how they belong to like this real world and the digital city, like digital place. So I'm just wondering how you think of like the people's like the tendency of, or I don't know, like people's motivation or desire to take it very granted or very natural to like play a role or just live in both worlds, like kind of influence them, or is connected to the possibility of the scenario 1 or 2, or like how do you think the the role of the motivation of the like people or the desire or intrinsic inclination to the digital role?
Maybe I don't understand fully your question. I think you're right that for this 18-year-old, the digital and the urban is one and the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I couldn't understand my question. I mean, what's the point of asking if it's not online?
Yeah.
If it's not online, it doesn't exist.
Right.
But of course, we know that it does exist, right? It's a Baudrillard hyper-reality that, if that's the only reality that this person can see. I think to me that is again about an example of this demarcated freedom. So all experimentation, I think, will take place within that merged digital and physical space. It doesn't mean that it won't be productive or alternative in some cases, right? For example, we can see that youth environmental movements around cities mostly organized digitally, but very real in the way that the young people reclaim their urban spaces across the world. But it still is going to be demarcated. But I think and I don't know if this relates to your question or I'm just jumping on the question as an opportunity to think that, yes, it's not just that 18-year-olds cannot separate the digital from the material. It's certain 18-year-olds who can't, who are experiencing primarily the city as consumers. The other 18-year-olds, and it was a striking difference. And again, I don't want to say that everything is about class, of course not. But this other group of 18-year-olds could not associate with that narrative, who could not identify with that narrative, the digital lantern, that excitement. It's like it's not their world. So for them, that convergence does not exist, or does not exist in the same way. So yes, spaces of experimentation, I think, and counter narratives exist, and absolutely, in some cases can be generated and exploded, when the digital comes together with the physical. But I think they do remain demarcated within a space that everything outside that is unfamiliar and irrelevant. That I think is a big problem. Because it lives outside, for example, the other 18-year-olds, right? Themselves, not just parts of the city, but also other urban communities. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, I was just curious about like how you thought of like the like on people's like different motivation or desire from other generations or like other types of groups, like in demographic terms. So yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, I think it has to do with that demarcated digital imaginary.
Right.
Okay, I think we can finish this time. I think it was really interesting and also very insightful talk, and also very informative. And probably many of you will have lots of new research topics and research questions. Okay, so why don't you join me in just giving a big hands to Professor Georgiou. Thank you so much.